Draguna, Macoity, Dracorum Satis D. Draguna, Macoity, Dracorum Satis D. Draguna, Macoity, Dracorum Satis D. Draguna, Macoity, and Dracorum Satis D. It was. Oh. Just. Welcome to Teacup For One.
Nothing happened.
My name is Matt and I have 2 degrees. And welcome to the grand finale of Witch Week. Which week? This week. And I've saved the best for last. Which is what? Which is Disney witches. Witches. Disney witches. But first I need to give a special shout out to one of my fellow YouTubers, Jennifer at The Magic in the Music, for helping me come up with this idea. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Honestly, if you haven't checked out The Magic in the Music yet, it's a channel I can't recommend enough. It's this great blend of Disney content ranging from things like Disney Parks vlogs to film analysis, but there's a very special emphasis on her channel on music. So there are musical tutorials and there are some really incredible Disney song analysis. And not to get too Matt Reviews Disney foods on you right now, but honestly, if you like music and if you like magic, you will love the Magic in the Music YouTube channel. So just go check out Jennifer and her stuff. It's incredible. Anyway, I was trying to think of a really great way to wrap up Witch Week, trying to pick the perfect film. And then Jennifer suggested Mary Poppins, saying, can we just acknowledge that she's a witch? And it got me to thinking, is Mary Poppins actually a witch? Because if you're new to the world of internet fan theories, there are a lot of ideas about where Mary Poppins' powers actually come from. There's a recent theory that Mary Poppins might be of the same species as Pennywise the Clown from It. There's another long-standing theory that she could actually be a Time Lord, like Doctor Who. And of course, we've got a lot of people who believe that she is a witch that trained at Hogwarts. And by the way, if she did go to Hogwarts, she was 100% a Ravenclaw and power to the claw. Caw. And after giving it long and careful consideration, I have come to the conclusion that yes, Mary Poppins is a witch, but not the Hogwarts kind of witch. The Disney kind of witch. Because let's not forget about the often forgotten but far superior Disney film Bedknobs and Broomsticks, starring Angela Lansbury as Eglantine Price, an apprentice witch in 1940 trying to use her magic to help England in the war effort. Now, there are some very clear ties between these two films, especially when you look at Miss Price's magic up against Mary Poppins' magic. But before we get into the whole fan theory part of this video, you just can't deny that these two movies feel very similar, and there's a good reason for that. Bedknobs and Broomsticks was produced 7 years after Mary Poppins, so they had the benefit of taking all the techniques and special effects that were perfected on Poppins and using them in this film, in addition to material that was written for Poppins that ultimately wasn't used, probably most notably the beautiful briny sea sequence. Sea sequence. But here's why I believe these movies are connected on a narrative level. Eglantine Price is a beginner witch who is struggling to perfect her spells, and to be fair, she has a huge roadblock in front of her because all of the spells that she's attempting have been sourced from an incomplete ancient manuscript, and they have been tampered with by a con man who is trying to make them sound more modern and mystical. However, based on the little bit of magic that we do see in Bedknobs and Broomsticks, there's a pretty clear connection between what Miss Price is attempting to do and what Mary Poppins actually accomplishes, as if Mary Poppins had access to the untampered resources. So yes, I am proposing that Mary Poppins and Bedknobs and Broomsticks take place in the same universe, and both witches are harnessing their power from the Spells of Asteroth. Now, when I say Asteroth, I'm talking about an ancient wizard who wrote a book of spells, not the demon who apparently guards the gates to hell. Anyway, no. Asteroth wrote the book of spells that Miss Price uses throughout Bedknobs and Broomsticks and that Mary Poppins presumably used to become the world's greatest nanny. We don't get a ton of backstory on Asteroth, but the little that we do get provides a potential origin story for the chalk drawing land that we go visit in Mary Poppins. Basically, Asteroth was a wizard who was experimenting with magic to try to make animals more human, but it worked a little too well because then the animals took over, they revolted against Asteroth, killed him, and used his magic to create their own environment and community of animals on the Island of Naboombu. The Island of Naboombu has some distinct visual similarities to the chalk drawing land where Mary takes the Banks children, so it's entirely possible that the two of them exist in the same alternate reality that was created by the animals after they stole Asteroth's magic. The biggest difference being that animals and humans are able to live in harmony in the region that Mary and the Banks kids visit when they access this alternate reality through the chalk drawing. But it's not just that both worlds look the same and feature talking animals. They both follow the fundamental rule that it is impossible to take an object from one realm into another. It's more apparent in Bedknobs and Broomsticks because the only reason the characters go to the Island of Naboombu is to steal the Star of Asteroth. When they try to bring it back to our reality, it materializes into thin air. And now, it's not as apparent in Mary Poppins, but the same thing does happen. When they're in the chalk drawing land, Michael has a candy apple, and then just as Mary transports them back to England, the candy apple fully disappears, and I'm pretty sure Michael didn't finish that whole candy apple on the ride back. Now, as for the magic, once you start to look at what Mary Poppins is actually doing compared to Eglantine Price, it's pretty clear that they are using the same spells. There's just a very obvious difference in their level of skill. Eglantine Price spends the entire movie just looking for that one spell for substitutionary locomotion, the art of giving life to inanimate objects. And eventually she figures it out with some very rough results, which is funny considering that Mary Poppins has this spell completely figured out and she can just do it in a snap.
Snap!
Now, I would argue that Mary Poppins' umbrella is actually enchanted with two spells that we see in Bedknobs and Broomsticks. The first would be Lapito Lacrips Crumpet Leech, also known as the Flying Spell. Now, obviously, Mary Poppins doesn't ride a broom, but the thing we have to remember here is that Miss Price is a beginner witch. She's basically in witch preschool, and Mary Poppins would be like the tenured professor of a magic university. Do you honestly think someone at that level, as practically perfect in every way as Mary Poppins, would be caught dead riding a broom? Honestly, Michael, I thought I taught you better. Now, I'm also inclined to believe that her umbrella is enchanted with the famous traveling spell, the same spell that Miss Price uses to enchant the bed to enable them to travel all over the world. They never say that the traveling spell needs to be used on a bed, only that you need some kind of object that you can twist to enact the spell. And in the case of Mary's umbrella, that would probably be the bird. Now, we never see Mary Poppins actually use the traveling spell on screen, but I have a very good reason for believing that her umbrella is enchanted with it. And that's because Mary Poppins never ages. Now, stick with me here. In the novel that Bedknobs and Broomsticks is based on, the author goes into a little bit more detail about the traveling spell. In the movie, we only learn that you have to twist the bed knob a quarter turn to the left to travel anywhere in the world. But in the novel, we learn that if you twist the bed knob to the right, you can travel anywhere in time. Yes, we are dabbling in time travel now. Because think, it makes perfect sense. That would explain why Mary Poppins is able to jump from time period to time period, to encounter different generations of the same family, and to never have aged a day. And now, just humoring the idea that maybe Mary Poppins has enchanted her umbrella with the famous traveling spell, enabling her to travel through time, let's consider one more possibility. That Carrie, from Bedknobs and Broomsticks, grows up to be Mary Poppins. Now, of course, the first thing you're going to do when you make the decision to take up a career as a time-traveling nanny would be to change your name and to take on a name that doesn't have any existing historical relevance. The majority of the magic that Mary Poppins does are just refined, perfected versions of the spells that Carrie would have learned from Miss Price. And yes, all of Miss Price's books and spells were destroyed by the Germans. However, the Spells of Asteroth were left in their entirety at the bookseller in Portobello Road, and Carrie and her brothers still have the bed and can sneak in there at any time to retrieve it. It makes sense that after being adopted by Miss Price, Carrie would have started to take on some of her sensibilities and her accent, and just as Miss Price wanted to use magic for good to help stop the war, it makes sense that Carrie would want to use magic for good to help mend broken families, considering that she herself was an orphan who ended up finding a loving home. Anyway, I'm not saying Carrie is Mary Poppins. I'm just saying she might be. But anyway, friends, that concludes yet another episode of Teacup For... Actually, no. Before you come at me in the comments and say, oh, Poppins and Bedknobs and Broomsticks can't exist in the same universe because of David Tomlinson, let me just alert you to the fact that there is a fantastic fan theory floating out there on the internet that Professor Emilius Brown is actually a grown-up little Michael Banks. And I did the math, the timeline checks out, it makes total sense, but we're not going to get into that now because that concludes yet another episode of Teacup For One. Let me know in the comment section down below. Do you think Carrie could actually be Mary Poppins? Or Carrie Poppins? And if you want to follow me for the rest of my Halloween movie marathon, or you just want to see me talk about Disney, Shakespeare, and sometimes cats, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. It is so easy. All you have to do is click on my face. Thanks for joining me today, everyone. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees, and that's the Teacup For One. SUPERCALIFRAGALISTICESPIALIDOCIOUS.